Okay, so we are starting today with our first session. Parm Gill is going to be presenting on creating inclusive interactive H5P content. So thank you very much, Parm, for coming and sharing with us today, and I will pass over to you.
All right, thank you very much. So for today's session, I am going to deviate from what the planned format was. It was to present for 10 minutes and then to have a 20-minute discussion. I'm going to spend a little bit more time going over the H5P Evaluation Checklist, and then at the end, we can try out and evaluate some of the H5P interactions. And if I go a bit too fast on some of the checklist points, don't worry, I'm going to share the link with you. Most of this will focus on what the checklist is, how it came to be, and what it should address. And as the session description indicated, it is designed for participants who have knowledge of H5P and would like to learn how to use it to make more inclusive H5P interaction. So, a little bit about the history of H5P. It was created in 2013, shortly after HTML5 was released, and it started gaining use because it is a more efficient and more accessible replacement for things like Adobe Flash, other scripting programs like Director, or scripting languages like ActionScript. H5P is an abbreviation for HTML5 package, which is a web markup language. So it's important to note that it was designed for the web and for online. The main purpose of and the vision of H5P creators was to empower everyone to create, share, reuse interactive HTML5 content. Ensuring interactive content is accessible and inclusive is in line with that original vision to make interactive content flow freely and democratize it. I'll go over the process for how the checklist came to be and how it can be used. So this Google Trend chart shows increase in H5P term search right when COVID started, and as you can see, there's still a sustained interest in H5P. I don't have the exact data, but I know that it is used more and more at UBC as well as other institutions. And the key point of this chart is to note that other interactive technologies don't have a similar pattern. And what this pattern can be interpreted as is that it is a technology that is easily adaptable, and that there's definitely an interest in. So I'm going to move over to the next slide, which is observations. Is that visible? Okay. So as a learning designer, I've been using interactive content in H5P for a number of years. I've been exposed to it in courses that I've taken, I've worked on, and just I've had access through the course of my work. I've scoured the web to find good examples to include in resources that I've compiled for other users. I've also participated in testing research to develop an algorithm for potential automatic evaluation tool for the H5P Global Hub. So based on that experience and observation, here's what I've noted about what works well and where some of the issues are. So what works is that it does work really well to substitute more expensive and more complex tools for creating interactive learning content. Most of the content types are very easy to use or reuse or to create. And there's been research to indicate that it does increase student engagement with acting listening, particularly for self-paced and self-directed courses. So with the hybrid online approaches. what seems to be problematic is sometimes, like most new ed tech, people get excited about the tool and it's not used as intentionally as it could be. So for example, sometimes interactives are included just for the sake of making things interactive. The interactive content should really be aligned with the learning outcomes. So to use the H5P intentionally to facilitate the learning process. Sometimes I've seen people use interactions for, like, for example, an accordion type, just to condense content on a page, but it really doesn't add to the learning experience. I've also seen people use the course presentation type or the the timeline tool to present syllabus content. And from a learning user experience, that's not really that friendly to make your students click through a whole bunch of information to gather to get to what they need. So just thinking about the interaction types and applying it well to what we're using it for. So the next slide is, while I was creating the evaluation checklist, there was a few questions that I considered, and some of them are for the content type. Is it needed for learning? Does the design help to aid learning? And is it designed for all learners? So while I was considering that, I did approach this with my background of instructional design, knowledge of graphic and web design, multimedia production, ed tech, learner experience and user experience design, UDL, diversity and inclusion. So from that, 3 themes emerged: usability and functionality, design, accessibility and inclusion. On the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the checklist and how I organized it with these main themes. So the main theme for usability and functionality, that was focused on pedagogical functionality. Is the interaction helping with the pedagogical intentions of the learning and teaching? Because when it is considered along with good design, it can really be a beneficial tool for education. The shareability, use of ease, and overall qualities are other factors. And at this point, I am just going to hop over and introduce you to the checklist. And I'll start with the sections that I started. And again, these are a lot of points to consider, so I'm just going to quickly skim over some of the basics.
Yep. Checklist isn't visible.
Okay, let me try sharing again. Sorry. All right. Now, is that visible? Okay. Apologies for the technical issues. So I start with the pedagogical functionality because that's pretty much the most important intention of using EdTech. Is it aligned with the module and the learning outcomes? Is the content type selected? Is it a good fit for the material that you're presenting? By proximity and placement, I mean that within the learning. So for example, within the LMS, Canvas, is it positioned in a way that users can make connections to other learning? Is it used in a predictable pattern? And is it used to scaffold the learning experience? So by that, I mean, within the course structure, say, for example, if you're going to include a formative interaction in each module, is it in a predictable location so learners know what to expect as they're going through the course? Are the formative assessments progressing from more basic to complex as the content complexity changes? So are you using recognition, cued recall, freed recall to more complex, such as synthesizing concepts as the course goes on and develops? Are the durations appropriate? And for the longer ones, are times indicated? For this one, something like a documentation tool, it might take 30 minutes for a student to complete it. So let them know before they start, so they can set aside time for that. I'm just going to skip over a little bit. Use of ease. Is it intuitive? Are students able to control the pace of the videos? Can they move back and forth? So in an interactive video, if they've got some quizzing, can they, I've come across quizzes in an interactive video while I was testing where you complete the quiz, and if you don't pass, that's it, you're stuck. You cannot move forward. So you make sure you consider those things. Is it possible for students to redo the formative interactive content? Is it shareable? If you're creating it on a platform where others are using it, have you included the metadata? Is the attribution information included? And another one most people tend to forget is, has it been piloted? Has student feedback been considered? Is the content accurate? And if it's required in the course, is it current and relevant? Broken links, grammar, is the audio clean, clear? Does it add value to the overall learning experience? Or are we just getting students to click through? So those things need to be thought through very carefully. I'm just going to hop back over to the PowerPoint. And I'm going to talk about the next section that emerged, and that was the design. Can everybody see the PowerPoint? Okay. So design is often overlooked as being purely aesthetic or trivial, but visual design principles in multimedia learning design can impact affective and cognitive domains. For example, if students are struggling with H5P interactives that are not working, functioning well, or the information is too hard to decipher, they end up getting frustrated, disengaged, or unmotivated learners. I included this graphic because it really explains how the cognitive load theory is in line with these visual and multimedia principles and the items in the checklist. So part of the thing about using the interactions, we want to create them so we're aware of the intrinsic load, or the load that's involved in the students' learning materials, making sure that we simplify this content if we're so that students can process while they're learning. So simplification can also mean chunking the information. It could mean like breaking it up, segmenting it, even managing the dual channels that are mentioned in cognitive load theory, not presenting audio and visual too much information at once, so just managing that. The goal is to remove all extraneous load on the working memory. So any trivial details, decorative graphics, make sure that everything you include on the page is adding to the learning. So background music, for example, sound effects may not really add, with the exception of gamification, where you're really trying to make the emotional experience stand out. The germane load is how we're helping students to make connections with the new learning and with past information that they have. So using H5P for pre-training would be one way to do this. Again, chunking the information is something that helps, again, with that. So I'm going to hop over now to the design section of the checklist. And this design section is based on Richard Meyer's principles of multimedia learning, and then as well as visual design, graphic design principles. Some of these have been mentioned in the previous section, so I'm not including all these broken out here. They're covered in the checklist. So one of the things that people often forget is the alignments of screen elements. Too many alignments are distracting for our eyes to process. And web designers, web marketers have done decades of research on the way how our eyes track information on screen. So minimizing the alignments really helps users go through the information. So is the text aligned and formatting with its purpose in mind? So headings should be descriptive and short. They can be centered, but larger chunks of text are hard to read when they're centered. Is there visual cueing? So pattern, anomaly, white space. Are these things used to direct attention to reinforce pedagogical intentions? So for something like this, I would say if you have what I call an action item in a course, if you format it in a similar way, so the student's scanning it, they're going to see, oh, you want them to watch a video or you want them to read. Visuals communicate way faster than text, so then they can just scan and know that what's expected of them. Hierarchy of information, proximity, white space communicates visually about the connections of the information. So for example, if you have a graphic or a diagram and you're pointing to parts of it, don't use a legend, explain it right in the diagram, because those connections can be made easily when that information is spatially close to the related information. For multimedia, the most important thing is dual channel. When the way the brain processes information, if you have a little bit of text and some audio narration, that can be processed. But if you have a lot of text, narration, and plus moving graphics on a screen, our working memory just cannot process effectively. So we really want to consider managing the information as learners go through it. On a PowerPoint, it would be a couple of points and a bit of narration. As far as the narration, is it presented in a humanized way? Human narration is known to be more effective. Speaking with a warm, informal tone is more effective for learning, even writing in a warmer, informal tone. As I mentioned earlier, this is related. H5P is built from web information and sharing information on the web. So I think this is a resource that's really valuable to share. Can you see this website? Okay, so this is designed by the World Wide Web Consortium, and these are accessibility guidelines for cognitive accessibility for users with neurodiverse divergent users. So a lot of these do focus on some of the visual cueing principles I mentioned. A lot of these points also talk about chunking the information, but this is just a really nice resource that works for presenting information well on screen and designing for learners with cognitive challenges. Will make sure that all learners can access that information. So I'm hopping back over to the PowerPoint. And the final section is accessibility and inclusion. And for this, I wanted to talk about accessibility is more than just technical accessibility. It's operational, and then again, cognitive accessibility, as I mentioned. So on the checklist, that looks like everything from alt tags to, is it legible? Most of the H5P fonts included are legible, but sometimes in a presentation, you could position them so they overlap or they impact legibility. Considering contrast ratios, captioning, has that been included? Are we using heading tags so the content is screen reader friendly? Will it work in older computers and devices? And will it work on smaller mobile devices? The other important factor is inclusivity. Are the materials for use bias? Are strategies used to ensure representation? So anything from using ethnic names, non-traditional families for case studies or examples, using visuals, pictures of people. Is first-person language used for disability unless identity first is more appropriate for the content? Consulting the communities for their preferences, avoiding jargon. If you're intending the interaction to be shared more broadly, are you avoiding localized terms and making sure things like stigmatizing offensive terms? Most people, of course, wouldn't use that intentionally, but sometimes they're not aware of terms. For example, Inuit is more acceptable than using the term Eskimo. There's other terms like master bedroom is not used as much as primary bedroom just because of the connotation. So this is basically the checklist. And at this point, I'm going to stop and ask for questions.
Okay, thank you, Parm. So if anyone would like to ask any questions about this session, you are more than welcome to use the raise hand function, which is at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. You can also put any questions you have in the chat, or if you're feeling extra confident, you can unmute yourself and just ask away.
So what I'll do, feel free to interrupt or ask as we go through. I thought it would be nice to see how this looks in practice. And I just am on the eCampus Ontario H5P studio, and I'm just gonna pick this one here. I selected a course presentation because they have a nice variety of interaction types included. So I thought we could go through this and take a look at some of the things that we talked about to see if there's anything that really stands out as far as the checklist. So I'm going to go through the title, and if you noticed here, there's no real instructions to let people know how to progress through this. And this could be embedded on a page, and the instructions may be actually on the page. But I'm going to click on this arrow, and we're going to go through. Is there anything that stands out for someone on this page as perhaps extraneous information? Hint, hint.
The use of the image is really just decorative, right?
Yes, that's very decorative. It doesn't really add value to what the class overview is. These bullets are a little bit distracting also. Yeah. And again, this highlight was probably unnecessary. But let's move on. Again, with this page, we've got a lot going on. So I'll dive into it. We've got double bullets on everything. That's really makes it hard to read. We've got a lot of information on one slide. So breaking that up a little bit would be helpful. So I think that's what I've noticed on that page. I'll just click on to the next page. So now we're being quizzed. And I noticed there's a little icon here. I'm just going to click on it. I don't know what it does. There's no explanation. Oh, I would say that is the noise for these questions. But there was nothing to indicate that. Some of this is trial and error. Most people wouldn't need to be scaffolded for this for each and every time a question is presented. So just mentioning the instructions on the very first time they encounter this would be helpful. It's moving along through here. Again, there's quite a bit of information. This is just text. There's 17 pages, and this has a little button. We know what to do. And again, just fizzing text. I'm going to let someone else answer this one. Anything we can improve on this page as far as accessibility or helping students process?
I mean, just as I'm going to jump in, the text is really difficult to read. And my guess is that it's an image and it looks like there's parts cut off. So it wouldn't, I'm assuming, unless it's very well alt texted, which I doubt it would be, that could be an issue. I can see Joyce has a hand up as well. Joyce, you're welcome to unmute.
Yeah, it looks like the black font on the purple is not a very high contrast either. So I believe that would be an accessibility issue.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. There's also so many alignments. I see that there's made an effort to align some of these to each other, but again, the top part is not aligned. Then our eye bounces there, then we have to bounce there. This yellow doesn't seem to have any significance for the background, but the overlap is probably the hardest, the most noticeable challenge. So again, on this page, we've got multiple bullets. This one, we've got some images of books. And here we come to a video. And this is just a regular YouTube one. I don't believe there's any interactivity in here because that would be indicated with little dots on here. So I'll skip that one. But once in a while, you'll come across an interactive video and there'll be a question popping up and users should answer correctly. The other problematic things I've come across while testing is sometimes these interactions that are in a presentation, this one's really, really hard to read with that text. It looks like an image of text, which is not very accessible. Sometimes they'll have multiple questions on a presentation page, and then the user has to scroll. So on a larger screen, it will be all right, but on a bigger screen, it won't. So that's pretty much it. And I'm going to stop sharing because I've gone over by 1 minute.
Our next session doesn't start until 12:45. So if there are any more questions for Parm, please ask them now. I know I have a couple of questions, but I will leave the floor open to others first. Okay. So I guess one of my questions then, if we're getting into it, would be if, for example, you are using this checklist, is it good for like adapting materials, or is the idea that it will be more focused on creating something from scratch, or both?
It's both. It's designed to cover both. So not all those points are going to be applicable if you're using it, and they're not all going to be applicable if you're creating it. So it was sort of designed to cover both. I did a lot of research on OER evaluation tools. There's some really good ones out there by, there's one by BC Campus. There was one I checked by Commonwealth of Learning. Theirs was really, really good. So I looked at that. I looked at what I tested for the H5P OER Hub. I was in contact with the researcher and she gave me some really good input. So that was really valuable. So that's the intention. Any other questions?
Okay. Oh, yeah, Joyce, thank you.
I was just wondering for the use of H5P, I guess what is this advantage besides like being in kind of open resource over using some of the other tools?
Okay, that's a really good question. What H5P is, well, one of the biggest advantages that it's really easy to use to create content. There's free versions. Institutes can buy versions to build into their LMS. So that's one of the best features. The H5P.com is a service, so you can work with teams to create interactions. The biggest advantage over software such as like other software would be, the one question I get a lot is Articulate Storyline. Storyline is used for e-learning, and it's used to create one piece of like a module, whereas this H5P is designed to create, you can call it learning objects to put within the module. It's not as expensive as far as like the licensing for those software is quite expensive. Those are a little bit more complex to use, and they have their place and space, so they do work for some types of learning. My personal preference is I like the idea of H5P because they're, especially with the move to COVID, there's been a lot of research talking about how users process and read information online, and people are not reading as quickly as they used to years ago, unless they're at the post-grad level. Also, when people are reading online, they're accustomed to a certain type of information online. So what I would recommend for good learning design is if you're adding journal or more complex ideas that students need to read, make sure you include that reading ideally as paper. There's some data saying people read better from paper, and then add that variation by having data and information presented on screen, and then move over to some audio. That way you have mixing up the mediums. So that's sort of my opinion. But again, those other software programs do work really well. I see them a lot in business and companies and stuff when they're teaching software programs, or I've done some government courses that like ministry people have to take. So that way you have more of the data collection as people progress through that course. There's also the other thing I've come across with other software is as soon as it's updated, if you have more fancy features in there, like you're pulling data or you're making it context specific, when there's an update, sometimes that gets messed up and you have to do a lot of work to fix those things. I saw that with Articulate 2.0 when that was updated. Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, well, I think based on, it doesn't look like, I can't see any other questions in the chat, that we might finish up here with you, Parm. Thank you so much for your presentation. You know, I personally, as someone who uses H5P a lot, I can see how helpful having a checklist like this would be. So thank you for sharing. We will start our next session, which is from Nazli Igani, which is creating human connections in every classroom. We'll start at 1:45, so 12:45. So again, if anyone needs to take a quick break, you're more than welcome to do so. I will pop a quick screen up now just for the next couple of minutes. And then Nasli, when you're ready at 12:45, we can get started on your session.
Sure.